Hey guys, welcome back. Video number 5, week 3. Hopefully, this hasn't been too rough for you guys learning this way, but we continue on. So, last video we were talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis and America's response to that, and how the crisis was avoided. We're going to switch things up a little bit now. In the past, I've gone through the entire Cold War and then went back in time and covered what we're going to talk about today over the next couple days, actually. But this year, I wanted to do it a little bit differently. I wanted to go into kind of what's going on at the same time that the Cuban Missile Crisis was going on. During the Cold War, there's a lot going on more than just the Cold War itself. And one of the most important things that America was able to do was take part in the civil rights movement and end the Jim Crow laws that were in the South and just really advance as a society. Now, so if you guys are following along, again, go ahead. We're going to start on slide 555. That's 555. So if you want to pull that up, go ahead. It is there. And you will see the slide titled The South in the 1960s. So after the Civil War ends, we know that the South did not all of a sudden become this haven for African Americans or really anybody of a different nationality or skin color, anyways. But we really do focus on the African American community. So, like I said, in the South, they developed these things called Jim Crow laws, and we've talked about Jim Crow before. They're a set of laws that are really meant to just um, hold the African American community at a lower level than the Caucasian community. So they're still established in the South. The Civil War ends, Jim Crow starts, and it doesn't end. It just continues on and on. And we see the South and those African Americans in the South feel the pain that is Jim Crow laws. Now, these laws are meant to limit advancement of African Americans and other minorities, but really those that were former slaves initially, and then it just carries on over into you know 1900s, so on and so forth. So even the descendants of slaves, or even people that weren't slaves to begin with, that just ended up living in the South, they're going to be subject to Jim Crow as well. But as the 1960s approached, really the early mid 1950s, these laws are going to be challenged by groups looking for equality. They want civil rights. And if you guys are familiar with our Bill of Rights, which I know you are because I've taught it to you, rights are things that are God given. All right. And civil rights are rights that are given to all citizens. It makes sense. Okay. So, with things like voting, things like um, going to school, running for public office, just being treated fairly. These are civil rights. So it's important to kind of know what they are because African Americans in the South did not have these rights. At least they weren't they weren't really equal rights, if you want to put it that way. And so we talk about groups that are trying to help out and change the way that the South operates. And one of these groups is known as the NAACP. That's NAACP. Now it stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So this doesn't just impact African Americans, it's anybody of color. Okay. So this group is going to really work to end segregation in the United States. Now, segregation was put into place in 1896, and that's with the decision of Plessy versus Ferguson. Essentially, this law or this court case says separate but equal. It can be separate, but it has to be equal. Now, this is inherently a lie. Nothing is equal if it is separate. Separate but equal is inherently unequal, right? Think about it. So if we have two schools, and we'll use whites and blacks just because that's what we're talking about. So you have an all-white school and an all-black school. They both have schools. They are equal, but they are separate. Now, just because maybe the white school has brand new textbooks and desks and whatever, the black school might have some desks and older textbooks, and it's equal, right? Because it's equal. They have the same, even though they don't. It's just the way it works. And it was not fair, but at the end of the day, the ruling of Plessy versus Ferguson established this in the South and really reinforced the Jim Crow law. It allowed white communities to hold themselves at a higher level than those African Americans living within their community. And it lasted for quite a long time. But this is what the NAACP is trying to fight. Now, the NAACP has a secret weapon, and he is an extraordinarily talented lawyer, and his name is Thurgood Marshall. He is a very successful lawyer, and he really focuses on segregation cases, which his success, even in the Supreme Court level, it brings more and more quality lawyers in the NAACP to fight for equal rights for everybody. Now, the NAACP still exists, and they are active in many things. So, as we move forward, probably one of the first big cases that we see as far as the NAACP stepping up is between um, this gentleman, Oliver Brown, and the Topeka, Kansas Board of Education. So Oliver Brown has an 8-year-old daughter, and she wants to attend a school that's significantly closer to their home. The unfortunate part of this is that it is an all-white school. Well, he says my daughter should be able to go to this school. It's more convenient. We're within the borders, boundaries. Therefore, she should go. Well, Topeka, Kansas said no, she can't because there's a black school down the road. Go ahead and go to that one. So Oliver Brown takes it to the Supreme Court. Thurgood Marshall takes on the case as far as looking to desegregate public schools, and it is unanimous. They say, you know what? Separate but equal is unconstitutional as far as education goes. You can't have uh, separate schools, so we need to get rid of that. So the courts essentially rule that schools need to begin desegregating as quickly as possible. Now, there's no real time frame on this. So even though Brown versus the Board of Education officially desegregates schools, it doesn't happen right away. In fact, it wouldn't happen for several years. And but it is still a big win. It says that this separate but equal, this ruling that was passed in 1896 of Plessy versus Ferguson, is unconstitutional and cannot be applied to public schools. So this is a big win for the civil rights movement. It really kickstarted the whole thing. Now, there are some mixed reactions to this. Okay, not everybody's happy. A lot of African Americans, a lot of blacks are like, "Woohoo! Yay! No more segregation." Um, a lot of northern whites didn't really necessarily agree, but they accept the decision. And these are people living in the north, right? If you guys want to think Civil War, north south, people living in the north are like, yeah, whatever, it's no big deal. But in the south, the whites are a little upset, right? They're met with this fear, this anger that their children now have to go to school with black kids, right? And that's a terrible way to think, but at the time, this was the South. Now, 90% of Congress is against this decision. And you're saying to yourself, how is that even possible? The North fought to end slavery. Well, we know that they didn't necessarily. Yeah, the North was free for slaves and African Americans during the Civil War and all that. But that doesn't mean that there weren't racists there. And even if you divide this, right, if you go 50% North and 50% South, every single Southerner will vote against this, and the majority of Northerners, obviously. Now, a lot of Southern states believe that the Supreme Court doesn't have the right to tell the state that they have to desegregate. Now, is that true? Well, let's look at our Constitution, right? If we remember back to our Bill of Rights, we'll look at the, I believe, 10th Amendment, might be the ninth. Don't quote me on this, it's late. But if it's not in the Constitution, it goes to the states. So they're like, yeah, you can't do this. So we're not going to do it. And that's why we see this big pushback against schools desegregating. Now there were a few. There were quite a few actually. And it was a rough time for the African Americans that were going to these all white schools, and it just wasn't a great time, but it was a step in the right direction as far as making everything equal. Because our Constitution, though, doesn't say that the government can uh, tell the states what to do. It does, however, say all men are created equal. So, if you have been living under a rock your entire life, there is a lady. Her name is Rosa Parks. Now, Rosa Parks, um, she works as a seamstress, and she's also a secretary for the NAACP. And that's important to note. Most people don't actually realize that her whole thing, though extremely important, was definitely staged. Okay. So in 1955, um, the nation's kind of focused on this desegregation of schools. Um, but something happens in Montgomery, Alabama. Rosa Parks gets on a bus, sits down. When she's asked to move because she's sitting in the white section, she refuses and she's arrested at the next stop. This really sparks the civil rights movement. Now, what you guys might not know is that this had happened months before, but not with Rosa Parks, with another young lady, and I can't remember her name right now, but I think she's like 15 years old, and she's on a bus. She's pregnant. 15-year-old pregnant African American girl refuses to move, gets arrested, and the NAACP does not use this as their big aha moment. Why? Well, if you think about society back then, if you have a 15-year-old pregnant girl, that is not the person that you want to be leading the movement, right? People are like, oh well, look at you guys. So okay, let's try this again. Rosa Parks, she works with us. She's a good, wholesome lady. Let's put her on the bus, and she'll get arrested, and then we'll bring national media to this. So it's actually really smart. And I don't want to take anything away from Rosa Parks. Obviously, this is a huge thing. It would really set in motion the civil rights movement. Uh, but yeah, it's really interesting. So after this happens, after Rosa Parks says, "Yeah, I'm not getting off," she's arrested, um, and there's this boycott movement that happens in Montgomery. And a boycott is refusing to use a service or product. I mean, if you guys want to think all the way back to the Revolutionary War, the colonists boycotted British goods. It's a pretty good uh, protesting technique because it doesn't hurt anybody, and it gets its point across. So they start this boycott, and it's led by someone you might know. He is 26 years old at the time. He is a minister and he is a doctor, and he is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He sets this thing in motion. He says, "Hey, we're boycotting the bus system." So in 1955, over 50,000 African Americans stopped using the bus. Now, what does that do? How do you impact change? And I've said it before and I'll say it again. The best way to impact something is to impact somebody's money. So it cost the city thousands and thousands of dollars. Eventually, the Supreme Court hears about this and says, yep, you know what? You can't segregate on buses. And so in Montgomery, Alabama, the bus system desegregates. There is no more white spots. There are no more black spots. There are just seats on a bus. So it is a big deal. It kicks this whole thing off. Yeah, Brown versus the Board of Education is huge in 51, but really the civil rights movement and the sit-ins and the boycotts and everything that we will see moving forward starts here in 1955 with Rosa Parks. So it really spurs a movement for equality. So that's where we're going to leave off today, guys. Hopefully you learned something. And I really don't expect you guys to not know who Rosa Parks is, but I want you to kind of realize, yeah, we have the Cold War going on, but at the same time, there's this civil rights movement. So we have this world, this global thing, and we have this local American thing going on at the same time. Well, until next time, guys, hope you guys are tuning in and checking these out. They will help you on your future quizzes. So we'll see you next time.